The blood on her split lip had dried to a dark crimson when Bennett Bradford first saw her stumbling along the dusty road leading into Desdemona, Texas, her right leg dragging behind her like deadweight and one eye swollen nearly shut. He had been riding back from checking the fence lines on his family's cattle ranch that scorching August afternoon in 1877 when he spotted the woman's silhouette wavering in the heat shimmer rising from the parched earth. At first, Bennett thought she might be a mirage, one of those cruel tricks the Texas sun played on a man's mind after hours in the saddle. But as his bay mare closed the distance, he realized with a jolt of alarm that she was real and in terrible trouble. Her cotton dress, once probably a pale blue, was torn at the shoulder and streaked with dirt and what looked like dried blood. She moved with the painful determination of someone who had nowhere else to go but forward, each step clearly agony. Bennett urged his horse into a faster trot and reached her within moments. When his shadow fell across her path, she flinched violently and stumbled backward, nearly falling before catching herself with a sharp gasp of pain. Her hands came up defensively, and he saw the bruises wrapping around her wrists like ugly purple bracelets. "Easy now," he said softly, dismounting slowly so as not to startle her further. "I am not going to hurt you, miss. My name is Bennett Bradford. My family has a ranch just north of here." She stared at him with her one good eye, the other too swollen to open fully. Her breathing was ragged and shallow. Bennett guessed she was maybe 22 or 23 years old, with long, dark blonde hair that had escaped its pins and hung in tangled waves past her shoulders. Even battered and terrified as she was, something about her bearing suggested strength beneath the fear. "You are hurt bad," he continued, keeping his voice gentle. "Please, let me help you. There is a doctor in Desdemona about 2 miles from here. You will not make it on foot, not in this condition and not in this heat." She swayed slightly, and he could see her weighing her options, trust a stranger or collapse in the middle of nowhere. Finally, she gave the smallest nod. "Can you ride?" he asked. "I think so," she whispered, her voice hoarse and cracked. Bennett led his mare closer and helped the woman mount, moving as carefully as he could when she winced at every touch. Once she was settled in the saddle, he swung up behind her, keeping one arm loosely around her waist to steady her. She tensed at the contact but did not pull away. They rode in silence for the first mile. Bennett could feel her trembling against him, whether from pain, fear, or both, he could not tell. The August sun beat down mercilessly, and he was grateful they did not have far to go. Desdemona shimmered in the distance. A collection of wooden buildings clustered along the main road like they were huddling together for company in the vast emptiness of West Texas. "Who did this to you?" The question escaped Bennett before he could stop himself, rough with anger at whoever had left this woman in such a state. She went rigid in his arms and did not answer. He felt her pain like a physical thing, radiating from her battered body, and cursed himself for pushing. They continued in heavy silence until the outskirts of town appeared around them. Desdemona was not much to look at, a cattle town that had sprung up along the trail drive routes, but it had the essentials. A general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, a church, and Doc Reynolds, who had patched up more cowhands, ranchers, and unfortunate souls than anyone could count. Bennett guided the mare straight down the main street toward the doctor's office, ignoring the curious stares from the handful of people on the wooden sidewalks. Doc Reynolds was in his shirt sleeves when Bennett helped the woman down from the horse and half carried her through the door. The old doctor took one look at her condition and immediately cleared his examination table, sending a stack of medical journals tumbling to the floor. "What happened?" Doc Reynolds asked, his weathered face creasing with concern. "Found her on the road," Bennett said. Someone worked her over pretty bad. The woman's good eye darted between them, still wary despite their obvious intention to help. Doc Reynolds washed his hands in the basin and approached her with the careful movements of someone used to treating frightened animals. "Young lady, I need to examine you to see how badly you are hurt. Is that all right?" His voice was kind but professional. She nodded slowly, and Bennett stepped toward the door to give her privacy. But her hand suddenly shot out and grabbed his wrist, surprisingly strong despite her injuries. "Please," she whispered. "Stay." He looked to Doc Reynolds, who shrugged and gestured for Bennett to take a seat in the corner. The doctor worked methodically, cleaning the cuts on her face, checking her ribs with gentle fingers that made her gasp, examining the deep bruises on her arms and legs. Her right ankle was badly swollen, possibly sprained or fractured. "Nothing broken except maybe that ankle, but you have taken quite a beating," Doc Reynolds said finally. "You are going to be sore for weeks, and that I will take time to heal. Can you tell me your name, miss?" "Louisa," she said quietly. "Louisa Greene." "Well, Miss Greene, you need rest and care. Where are you staying? Do you have family in Desdemona?" Louisa's expression closed off like a shutter slamming down. "I do not have anywhere." Bennett felt something twist in his chest. He stood up from the corner chair, moving into her line of sight. "Miss Greene, my mother runs a boarding house on our ranch for the wife of our foreman and a widow woman who helps with cooking. We have space. You would be safe there while you heal." "I cannot pay," Louisa said, her voice thick with shame. "Nobody is asking you to," Bennett replied firmly. "You need help and we have the means to give it. That is all there is to it." Doc Reynolds nodded approvingly. "The Bradford place is respectable, Miss Greene. Bennett's mother, Sarah, is a good woman. You would be well looked after." Louisa studied Bennett's face for a long moment, and he had the uncomfortable sensation of being thoroughly assessed. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because she finally nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. Doc Reynolds bandaged her ankle and gave Bennett a tin of salve for the bruises, along with instructions for care. Bennett paid the doctor and then helped Louisa back outside. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The ride to the Bradford ranch took just over an hour, and by the time they arrived, full darkness had fallen and the stars blazed overhead in that particular way they did in the Texas countryside, unobscured by city lights. The ranch house was a sprawling single-story structure built of wood and stone, with a wide porch wrapping around the front and sides. Light glowed warmly from the windows, and Bennett could smell his mother's cooking even before he dismounted. He helped Louisa down carefully, noting how she bit her lip to keep from crying out when her injured ankle touched the ground. The front door opened before they reached it, and Sarah Bradford stood silhouetted in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. She was a handsome woman in her late 40s, with Bennett's same dark hair streaked with silver and sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "Bennett, I was getting worried. You are late for supper and—" She trailed off as she took in Louisa's condition, her expression shifting immediately to one of maternal concern. "Oh, you poor dear. Come in right now." Within minutes, Sarah had taken charge with the efficient authority of a woman who had raised 3 sons and helped run a working ranch for over 20 years. She settled Louisa in the best guest room, brought warm water and clean cloths for washing, and produced a nightgown that had belonged to Bennett's younger sister before she married and moved to Dallas. Bennett waited in the main room with his father, James Bradford, a solid man in his early 50s with a weathered face and calloused hands that spoke of a lifetime working the land. His 2 younger brothers, Timothy and Marcus, had already eaten and gone out to the bunkhouse where the ranch hands stayed, so the house was relatively quiet. Found her on the road, James asked, packing tobacco into his pipe. Yes, sir. Someone beat her bad, left her to walk in the heat. James's jaw tightened. Any idea who? She would not say. His father lit the pipe and drew on it thoughtfully. Might be she has good reason to keep quiet. Might be whoever did it is someone with power or influence. Might be she is scared. Bennett had been thinking the same thing. The nature of Louisa's injuries, the way she had flinched when he first approached, the fear that still lingered in her eyes, all of it suggested a violence that was personal rather than random. Sarah emerged from the guest room and closed the door softly behind her. She is resting now, poor thing. I have never seen someone so battered and still on their feet. Whatever happened, she has been through hell. She looked at Bennett. She asked for you before she fell asleep. Me? Bennett was surprised. She wanted to make sure you were still here, that you had not left. I think you are the first person who has shown her kindness in some time, and she is afraid of losing that. Something warm and protective unfurled in Bennett's chest. He barely knew this woman, but the thought of someone hurting her made his blood boil. I will be here, he said firmly. The next morning, Bennett woke before dawn as always, and went through his usual routine of checking on the livestock and meeting with the hands about the day's work. But his mind kept drifting back to the injured woman sleeping in the house, wondering if she was all right, if she needed anything, if she was frightened waking up in a strange place. When he came in for breakfast, he found Louisa sitting at the kitchen table with his mother, holding a cup of coffee in both hands like it was precious. She looked slightly better in the morning light, clean and dressed in one of Sarah's spare dresses that hung a bit loose on her frame. The bruises stood out in stark relief against her pale skin, and she moved stiffly, but her good eye brightened when she saw him. Good morning, Bennett said, suddenly feeling awkward under her direct gaze. Good morning, Louisa replied. Your mother has been very kind. I do not know how to thank you both. Sarah waved a hand dismissively. Nonsense. You eat something now. You are far too thin. Over the next week, Louisa began to heal physically, though the bruises faded slowly from purple to yellow-green and her ankle remained tender. She helped Sarah around the house as much as she was able, insisting on earning her keep despite Sarah's protests that she needed to rest. Bennett found himself looking for excuses to come back to the house during the day, bringing fresh water, checking if anything needed fixing, anything to catch a glimpse of her. They talked in small moments, careful conversations while she hung laundry or shelled peas on the porch. She told him she had come from a small farm east of Desdemona, that she had no family left since her parents died of fever 2 years prior. She spoke carefully, revealing little about what had brought her to the road that day, battered and alone. Bennett did not push, but he wondered constantly. It was on the 8th day after he found her, a cooler evening with storm clouds building on the horizon, that everything changed. Bennett was on the porch oiling a saddle when Louisa came out and sat in the chair beside him. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the clouds roll in before she finally spoke. His name was Victor, she said quietly. Victor Morrison. Bennett's hand stilled on the leather. He set down the oil rag and turned to face her fully, giving her his complete attention. I worked for his family, Louisa continued, staring out at the darkening sky. They own the biggest ranch in the county, about 15 miles east of here, the Morrison place. I was hired as a housekeeper after my parents died and I lost our farm to debt. Victor is the oldest son. He is 26 and set to inherit everything. She wrapped her arms around herself, though the evening was still warm. Bennett resisted the urge to reach out to her, sensing she needed to tell this story in her own way. At first, he was polite, even charming. He would compliment my work, ask about my day. I thought he was just being kind. Then he started finding excuses to be alone with me. He would corner me in hallways, stand too close, touch my arm or my waist. I tried to avoid him, tried to make sure I was never alone, but it is a big house and... Her voice cracked and she paused to collect herself. Bennett felt rage building in his gut, white-hot and terrible. One night, about 3 weeks ago, he came to my room. The servants' quarters are separate from the main house, and no one would hear if I called out. He forced his way in and She swallowed hard. He tried to force himself on me. I fought back. I scratched his face. I screamed. I kicked him where it counted. He was not expecting that. He was not expecting me to fight. "Good," Bennett said roughly. "Good for you." Louisa's lips quirked in the ghost of a smile. He left that night, but he was furious. Humiliated. The next day, I went to his parents, Mr. and Mrs. Morrison. I told them what their son had tried to do. I thought they would help me, protect me, dismiss him or send him away. Instead, they called me a liar. They said I was trying to trap their son, seduce him for his money. They said I was making up wicked stories to ruin his reputation. They took his side, Bennett said flatly. They always were going to take his side. He is their son, their heir. I am just a hired girl with no family and no money. Who was going to believe me? The bitterness in her voice was sharp enough to cut. They told me to leave immediately. No final wages, no references, nothing. When I refused, when I said I deserved to be paid for my work, Victor dragged me outside himself. Her hand unconsciously went to her swollen eye. He beat me in the yard where all the ranch hands could see. He called me terrible names, said I was worthless, said I should be grateful he had even looked at me. No one stopped him. His parents watched from the porch. When he was done, when I could barely stand, he told me if I ever came back or if I ever told anyone what happened, he would kill me and make sure no one ever found my body. Then he had 2 of his hands take me out to the middle of nowhere and dump me like garbage. They left me on that road where you found me with nothing but the clothes on my back. I walked for 2 days before I reached Desdemona. I did not know where else to go. Silence fell between them, heavy with the weight of what she had revealed. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the first drops of rain began to patter on the porch roof. Bennett's jaw was clenched so tight it ached. He had heard of the Morrison family. Everyone in the county had. They were wealthy, powerful, with political connections and enough money to buy their way out of almost any trouble. Victor Morrison had a reputation as a gambler and a drinker, but the darker rumors about his treatment of women had always been dismissed as gossip. "Why did you tell me?" Bennett asked finally. "You have kept this secret for over a week." Louisa turned to look at him directly, and in the stormy twilight her expression was fierce despite the bruises. "Because you asked. That first day you asked who did this to me, and I could hear in your voice that you genuinely wanted to know. Not so you could gossip or judge me, but because you cared. No one else has cared." She reached out and placed her hand over his, a touch that sent electricity racing up his arm. "And because I trust you, Bennett Bradford. I do not know why, we barely know each other, but I feel safer with you than I have felt in months. Years, maybe. You found me broken on that road and you did not ask what I had done to deserve it or assume I had brought it on myself. You just helped me. That means everything." Bennett turned his hand over so their palms met, his fingers folding around hers gently, mindful of the fading bruises on her wrist. "I am glad you told me, and I am glad you fought back. What he did, what his family did, it was not right. It was evil. But there is nothing to be done about it," Louisa said, pulling her hand back and looking away. "The Morrisons are too powerful. If I accused Victor publicly, they would destroy what little reputation I have left. I would never work again. Or worse, he might make good on his threat. So he just gets away with it." Bennett could not keep the anger from his voice. Men like Victor Morrison always get away with it, Louisa said wearily. That is how the world works, especially for men with money and family names. I am just trying to survive now, to heal and figure out what comes next. I cannot fight them. I do not have the means or the power. The storm broke open above them, rain pouring down in sheets that turned the yard into a sea of mud within minutes. They sat together on the porch, protected from the downpour but surrounded by its violence, and Bennett made a decision. "Stay here," he said. "On the ranch, I mean. My mother already loves having you around, and we could use help managing the household, especially during roundup season when we have extra hands to feed. You would have a real job, fair wages, a safe place to live. You would never have to worry about the Morrisons again." Louisa stared at him with wide eyes. "Bennett, I cannot ask that of you. You are not asking. I am offering. My parents will agree, I know they will. You deserve a chance to start over somewhere you do not have to be afraid." "Why?" she asked softly. "Why would you do this for me?" Bennett looked at her, really looked at her, taking in the determined set of her jaw despite the fear in her eyes, the way she held herself with dignity even when she had every reason to crumble, the strength that radiated from her core despite everything she had been through. He thought about the way his heart had stuttered when he first saw her smile, the way he found himself looking for her throughout the day, the fierce protectiveness that surged through him whenever he thought about what had been done to her. "Because it is the right thing to do," he said carefully, not quite ready to voice the deeper feelings stirring in his chest. "And because I think you are exactly the kind of person who deserves a second chance." Tears welled up in Louisa's eyes, the first he had seen her shed. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea what this means to me." They talked to James and Sarah that night after supper, and as Bennett had predicted, his parents were immediately supportive. Sarah had already grown fond of Louisa, and James respected his son's judgment. They agreed on fair wages, room and board included, and suddenly Louisa Greene had a future again. The weeks that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Louisa's bruises continued to fade, her ankle healed, and she threw herself into her work with a dedication that impressed everyone on the ranch. She helped Sarah with cooking and cleaning, mended clothes, tended the vegetable garden, and even learned to feed the chickens, though she admitted with a laugh that the rooster intimidated her. Bennett found himself drawn to her more and more. They would talk in the evenings after the day's work was done, sitting on the porch or walking down to the creek that ran through the property. She told him about her childhood on her parents' farm, about learning to read from her mother and helping her father plant crops. He told her about growing up on the ranch, about his dreams of expanding the herd and maybe one day breeding horses as well as cattle. Sometimes they did not talk at all, just sat together in the easy silence of two people who had found something rare and precious, the beginning of real understanding. It was Sarah who first noticed the way Bennett's eyes followed Louisa around the room, the way he always found excuses to be near her, the way he smiled differently when she laughed. She mentioned it to James one night as they were getting ready for bed, and he had chuckled and said he had noticed weeks ago. "Are you going to say something to him?" Sarah asked. "What is there to say? The boy is old enough to figure out his own heart. If he wants to court her, he will find the courage eventually, and if she feels the same, well, I cannot think of a better match. You do not think it is too soon?" After what she went through, James considered this, then shook his head. "I think that girl has been through hell and come out the other side. If she has found something good with our son, who are we to question it? She deserves happiness as much as anyone." 2 months after Bennett found Louisa on that dusty road, he finally worked up the courage to make his intentions clear. It was a Sunday, and they had all gone into Desdemona for church services, something the Bradford family did most weeks. Louisa had been hesitant about going into town, afraid of running into anyone from the Morrison ranch, but Bennett had quietly assured her that he would not let anything happen to her. The service passed without incident, and afterward, Bennett asked Louisa if she would take a walk with him. They strolled through the small town, past the general store and the blacksmith shop, until they reached the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open prairie. "Louisa," Bennett began, then stopped, suddenly nervous. He was 25 years old, confident with horses and cattle and ranch work, but this felt infinitely more important and terrifying than anything he had ever done. "I need to tell you something." She turned to face him, her expression open and curious. The bruises were gone now, leaving her face clear and pretty in the autumn sunlight. Her hair was pinned up neatly, and she wore a new dress Sarah had helped her make from fabric Bennett had bought at the general store, though he had pretended it was just something they had lying around. "These past 2 months, getting to know you, spending time with you, it has meant more to me than I think you realize," Bennett continued, forcing himself to meet her eyes. "You are one of the strongest, bravest people I have ever met, and you are kind and funny and beautiful, and I cannot imagine this ranch without you anymore. I cannot imagine my life without you." Louisa's breath caught, and he saw hope dawning in her expression. "What I am trying to say, and doing a poor job of it, is that I would like permission to court you properly. If you are interested, if you think you might feel the same way I do, which is—" He took a deep breath. "Which is completely in love with you, Louisa Greene." For a moment she just stared at him, and Bennett's heart plummeted, certain he had misread everything, that she saw him only as a friend or a rescuer, nothing more. Then a brilliant smile spread across her face, so bright it rivaled the sun. "Oh, Bennett," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "I have been half in love with you since you asked who hurt me, since you looked at me with anger for what had been done to me instead of judgment for what I must have done to deserve it. I have been completely in love with you since you offered me a home and a future when I had nothing. Yes, of course, yes." He pulled her into his arms, careful and gentle, and she came willingly, wrapping her arms around his waist and burying her face against his chest. They stood there at the edge of town, holding each other like they were the only 2 people in the world, and Bennett felt something settle in his chest, a rightness he had never experienced before. They courted properly after that, always under Sarah's watchful but approving eye. Bennett took Louisa on picnics down by the creek, taught her to ride his gentlest mare, showed her the far corners of the ranch where wildflowers grew in spring and you could see for miles. She shared her dreams with him, talked about wanting to learn more, maybe teach children someday, make a difference in small ways. He told her about his plans for the ranch, his hopes to build something lasting for future generations. They talked about the hard things too. Louisa admitted that she sometimes had nightmares about Victor Morrison, that she was still afraid he might somehow find her and hurt her again. Bennett promised he would never let that happen, that she was safe here, that he would protect her with his life if necessary. The fierce determination in his voice seemed to comfort her, and the nightmares gradually became less frequent. In December, as the Texas winter settled over the ranch with cool winds and occasional frost, Bennett asked James for permission to marry Louisa. His father had smiled and clapped him on the shoulder, saying he had been waiting for this conversation for months. Sarah cried happy tears and immediately began planning. Bennett proposed on Christmas Eve, presenting Louisa with a simple gold band that had belonged to his grandmother. They sat by the fireplace in the main room, the rest of the family having tactfully disappeared to give them privacy. And when he asked if she would marry him, her yes was instantaneous and joyful. They were married in February of 1878 in the small church in Desdemona, with the whole town turning out to celebrate. Doc Reynolds was there, beaming like a proud grandfather. Sarah's friends from the ladies' auxiliary brought enough food to feed an army. Even some of the neighboring ranchers came, men who respected the Bradford family and wished them well. Louisa wore a beautiful white dress that Sarah and the widow Mrs. Patterson had sewn together, with lace at the collar and cuffs. She looked radiant, her face glowing with happiness, and when Bennett saw her walking down the aisle toward him, he felt his throat tighten with emotion. This remarkable woman, who had survived so much and still had room in her heart for love and hope, was choosing to spend her life with him. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They exchanged vows in front of God and their community, promising to love and honor each other in good times and bad. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Bennett kissed his bride with all the tenderness and passion he felt, and the church erupted in applause. The reception was held at the ranch, with music and dancing and more food than anyone could possibly eat. Bennett danced with Louisa until the sun set and the stars came out, and even then, he was reluctant to let her go. She laughed in his arms, her happiness so pure and unguarded that it made his heart ache. As the guests finally began to leave, and the night grew late, Bennett and Louisa slipped away to the small house he had built for them on the edge of the property. A wedding gift he had been working on in secret for months. It was not large, just 2 rooms and a porch, but it was theirs, a place to start their life together. That night, they came together as husband and wife with a tenderness that brought tears to both their eyes. Bennett was infinitely gentle, aware of Louisa's past trauma, but she met him with equal passion, whispering that she trusted him completely, that she wanted him. They learned each other slowly, reverently, and when they finally lay tangled together in the aftermath, Louisa traced patterns on his chest and murmured that she had never imagined she could feel this safe, this cherished, this loved. Their first year of marriage was filled with the ordinary joys and challenges of building a life together. Louisa threw herself into making their little house a home, sewing curtains and planting flowers around the porch. Bennett worked alongside his father and brothers, expanding the ranch's operations and proving himself as a capable manager. In the evenings, they would sit together on their porch, talking about their days and making plans for the future. They talked about children, both wanting a family but agreeing to wait a bit, to enjoy this time of just being together. Louisa wanted to be sure she was fully healed, emotionally and physically, before bringing a child into the world. Bennett understood and was content to wait, treasuring these months of learning to be husband and wife. It was in the spring of their 2nd year of marriage when their peace was shattered. Bennett had ridden into Desdemona to pick up supplies when he overheard a conversation in the general store that made his blood run cold. Victor Morrison was back in the area after spending time in Kansas City, and he was asking questions about a woman named Louisa Greene. Bennett finished his business quickly and rode back to the ranch at a gallop, his mind racing. He found Louisa in their garden, and the moment she saw his face, her expression changed to fear. "What is wrong?" she asked. "Victor Morrison is asking about you," Bennett said bluntly. "He is back from Kansas City and apparently looking for you." All the color drained from Louisa's face. She swayed, and Bennett caught her elbow, steadying her. "He said he would kill me," she whispered. "He promised." "He is not going to touch you," Bennett said fiercely. "I will not let him anywhere near you." That evening they held a family meeting. James listened gravely as Louisa, with Bennett holding her hand tightly, recounted the full story of what Victor Morrison had done to her. When she finished, James's expression was thunderous. "That man is a coward and a villain," he said flatly, "and he has no business coming around here looking for trouble." "But he is a Morrison," Louisa said helplessly. "They own half the county. If Bennett confronts him, they could ruin you, ruin the whole family." "Let them try," Sarah said sharply, surprising everyone with her vehemence. "We have worked this land for 25 years and built a good name on honesty and hard work. If the Morrisons want to come after us for protecting a woman from their son's wickedness, they can try, but they will find we are not so easily pushed around." Timothy and Marcus, Bennett's younger brothers, both in their early 20s, nodded their agreement. "We stand with you," Timothy said simply. The support of his family meant everything, but Bennett knew they needed to be smart about this. They could not just ignore Victor Morrison's inquiries, but they also could not afford to provoke an all-out war with the wealthiest family in the county. 2 days later, Victor Morrison himself rode up to the Bradford ranch with 2 of his men. Bennett saw them coming and met them in the yard, positioning himself deliberately between the visitors and the house where Louisa watched from the window, her face pale. Victor Morrison was a tall man with slicked-back blonde hair and expensive clothes that looked out of place in the ranch setting. He had cold blue eyes and a smile that never reached them. As he dismounted, Bennett noticed the faint scars on his face, marks from where Louisa had scratched him when she fought back. "Bennett Bradford?" Victor asked, his tone friendly but with an edge underneath. "That is right. What can I do for you, Mr. Morrison?" "I am looking for someone, a woman named Louisa Greene. I heard she might be working in this area." Victor's smile widened. "She used to work for my family, you see, and there was a misunderstanding when she left. I would like to find her and set things right, perhaps offer her old position back." Every word out of the man's mouth was a lie, and Bennett's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "I do not know anyone by that name," he said evenly. Victor's eyes flicked toward the house, and Bennett saw the exact moment recognition hit. His expression hardened. "That is interesting because I could swear I just saw her looking out your window. Louisa, come out here." His voice rose. "Come out here right now." The door opened and Louisa stepped onto the porch. Bennett wanted to tell her to go back inside, but he also recognized the courage it took for her to face her abuser. She stood straight, her chin up, though Bennett could see her trembling from where he stood. "Her name is Louisa Bradford now," Bennett said coldly. "She is my wife, and she is not going anywhere with you." Victor's face flushed with anger. "Your wife? You married that lying little—" He caught himself, but the venom in his voice was clear. "She is a thief and a liar, Mr. Bradford. She made false accusations against me and my family, nearly ruined my reputation. I should have her arrested." "For what crime?" James Bradford emerged from the barn, flanked by Timothy, Marcus, and several of the ranch hands. "Near as I can tell, the only crime here is the one you committed when you assaulted a woman in your employ, and then had her beaten and dumped in the middle of nowhere." Victor's hand moved toward the gun at his hip, and immediately every man on the Bradford side drew their weapons. Bennett had his rifle pointed at Victor's chest before the man could blink. "I would not do that if I were you," Bennett said quietly. "You are outnumbered and outgunned, and you are on my property. You have no claim on my wife, legal or otherwise. She owes you nothing. Now I suggest you get back on your horse and ride off our land before this situation escalates." For a long, tense moment, nobody moved. Victor's face was purple with rage, his jaw working. Finally, he seemed to realize he had no good options. He was not on his own land surrounded by his own men. He was outnumbered and outmaneuvered. "This is not over," Victor hissed. "My family has power in this county, Bradford. We can make your life very difficult." "Is that a threat?" James asked mildly. "Because I have witnesses here who just heard you threaten my family." Now, my son asked you politely to leave. I am not going to be so polite. Get off my land right now, or we will remove you by force." Victor remounted his horse with jerky, angry movements. He jabbed his heels into the animal's sides harder than necessary, making it shy. "You will regret this," he called back as he wheeled his horse around. "All of you." They watched the three men ride away until they were out of sight. Only then did Bennett lower his rifle and turn to check on Louisa. She had sat down heavily on the porch steps, her face buried in her hands. He was at her side in an instant, gathering her into his arms. "It is all right," he murmured into her hair. "He is gone. You are safe." "But he will come back," Louisa said, her voice muffled against his chest, "or his family will retaliate. I have brought this trouble to your door, to your whole family." "You did not bring anything," Sarah said firmly, coming over to sit beside them. "That man brought his own evil here and we sent it packing. We are not afraid of the Morrisons, dear." But privately, Bennett worried. The Morrisons did have power, connections to politicians and businessmen throughout the region. They could make things difficult for the Bradford ranch if they chose to, perhaps interfering with cattle sales or spreading malicious rumors. The question was whether Victor's pride would push him to retaliate or whether he would cut his losses and move on. The answer came 2 weeks later when Sheriff Coleman rode out to the ranch. He was an older man, generally fair but known to be friendly with several of the wealthy ranching families in the area. Bennett met him in the yard with a sinking feeling. "Bennett," Sheriff Coleman said, tipping his hat, "I need to speak with your wife." "About what?" "There has been a formal complaint filed against her. Victor Morrison claims she stole from his family when she was employed there, jewelry and cash. He is pressing charges." Bennett's jaw clenched so hard he thought his teeth might crack. "That is a lie, and you know it. Victor Morrison assaulted my wife and had her beaten. This is retaliation for her refusing to let him get away with it." "That may be," the sheriff said uncomfortably, "but I have a legal complaint filed and I have to investigate. I need to speak to Mrs. Bradford and search your property." The injustice of it burned like acid. Louisa had stolen nothing, they both knew it, but Victor was using the law as a weapon against her, against them all. Bennett wanted to refuse, to order the sheriff off their land, but he knew that would only make things worse. Louisa came out when Bennett called for her, her face pale but composed. She answered the sheriff's questions calmly, explaining that she had taken nothing but her own belongings when she left the Morrison ranch, though those had been torn and bloodied from Victor's assault. She offered to let the sheriff search their house, knowing he would find nothing. Sheriff Coleman conducted a perfunctory search and, as expected, found no stolen jewelry or cash. He looked relieved as he prepared to leave. "I will file my report saying there is no evidence to support Mr. Morrison's claim," he said. "But I will be honest with you folks. The Morrisons are powerful. They may not let this drop. They could take it to a judge, demand a trial. It would be your word against theirs. And they have money to buy the best lawyers and probably the judge too," James said bitterly. Sheriff Coleman did not deny it. He tipped his hat to Louisa. "I am sorry, Mrs. Bradford. I hope this is the end of it." But it was not the end. Over the following months, the Morrisons made their displeasure known in dozens of small, petty ways. They convinced the bank in Desdemona to refuse to extend credit to the Bradford ranch. They spread rumors that the Bradfords were harboring a thief and a liar. Several of the other ranchers, dependent on staying in the Morrisons' good graces, stopped doing business with the Bradfords entirely. It was a difficult time. Money became tight, and the strain wore on everyone. Bennett watched Louisa blame herself, saw the guilt eating away at her, and it tore him apart. He reassured her constantly that none of this was her fault, that they would get through it together, but he could see her struggling. It was Timothy who finally provided a solution. He had been in Desdemona talking to some of the other cowhands, and heard that a group of ranchers in the northern part of the county were forming an association, pooling resources, and negotiating better prices for their cattle directly with buyers from Kansas City and Chicago, bypassing the local middlemen who were often in the Morrisons' pockets. If we joined them, we would not need the bank here or the local buyers, Timothy explained. We could sell our cattle for fair prices and not be dependent on the Morrison family's goodwill or lack thereof. It was a risk. The new association was untested, and it would require more work to drive their cattle north to meet the buyers. But James and Bennett agreed it was their best option. They joined the association, along with a dozen other ranchers who were tired of being squeezed by the big families like the Morrisons. The first cattle drive north was hard work, but it paid off. They got better prices than they had in years, enough to pay off their debts and even have money left over to invest in improving the ranch. More importantly, they had broken free of the Morrisons' economic stranglehold. Victor Morrison made one more attempt to cause trouble, trying to file a civil suit claiming Louisa had damaged his reputation with false accusations. But by that point, enough people in Desdemona had heard the full story, whispered in saloons and at church socials, and public opinion had turned against him. Even the judge, a man known for his fairness despite his business dealings with the Morrisons, dismissed the case for lack of merit. Defeated and humiliated, Victor Morrison finally left for Kansas City for good, reportedly to work for his uncle's business there. His parents remained on their ranch, but their influence in the county was diminished. People remembered how they had tried to destroy a young couple for the crime of standing up to their son's cruelty, and they did not forget. As the storm of conflict finally subsided, Bennett and Louisa found themselves able to breathe again, to focus on their life together rather than constantly looking over their shoulders. It was during this time of renewed peace that Louisa discovered she was pregnant. She told Bennett one evening in the spring of 1879, just over a year after Victor Morrison had ridden away from the ranch for the last time. They were sitting on their porch watching the sunset, and she took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby," she said softly, her eyes shining. Bennett felt his heart expand in his chest, filling with a joy so profound it almost hurt. He pulled Louisa into his arms, holding her close, and felt tears prick his eyes. "Really? You are sure?" "Doc Reynolds confirmed it yesterday. I am about 3 months along, he thinks. The baby should come in early autumn." They sat together as the sun dipped below the horizon, talking about names and nurseries and all the wonderful possibilities that lay ahead. Bennett marveled at how far they had come from that day on the dusty road when he had found her broken and afraid. Now she was strong, safe, loved, and carrying their child. It felt like a miracle. Sarah was overjoyed at the news of her first grandchild, immediately beginning to knit blankets and baby clothes. James built a beautiful cradle from oak wood, polished to a golden sheen. Timothy and Marcus good-naturedly teased Bennett about becoming a father, saying he would never sleep again. As Louisa's pregnancy progressed, Bennett found himself even more protective of her than usual, constantly asking if she needed anything, if she was feeling all right, if she was doing too much work. She laughed at his hovering, but admitted she loved how attentive he was. In September of 1879, their son was born. The labor was long and difficult, and Bennett paced the floor for hours while Sarah and Mrs. Patterson attended to Louisa. When he finally heard his son's first cry, strong and healthy, he nearly collapsed with relief. Doc Reynolds emerged with a tired but triumphant smile. "You have a fine baby boy, Bennett, and your wife is resting comfortably. She did wonderfully." Bennett rushed to their bedroom and found Louisa propped up against pillows, exhausted but radiant, cradling a tiny bundle wrapped in one of Sarah's knitted blankets. She looked up at him with such love and happiness that he felt overwhelmed. "Come meet your son," she said softly. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the impossibly small face peeking out from the blanket. The baby had a dusting of dark hair and tiny, perfect features. As Bennett watched, his son's eyes opened, unfocused but already curious about the world. "He is perfect," Bennett whispered, touching one impossibly tiny hand with his finger. The baby's fingers curled around his thumb instinctively, and Bennett felt something fundamental shift inside him. This was his son, his family, the future he and Louisa were building together. They named him Benjamin James Bradford, after both his grandfathers, and he was welcomed into the family with abundant love. Bennett discovered the exhausting joy of fatherhood, the sleepless nights and constant worry, balanced by moments of pure wonder when Benjamin smiled or grasped his finger, or simply slept peacefully in his arms. Louisa was a natural mother, patient and nurturing, though Bennett made sure she did not carry the burden alone. He took his turns walking Benjamin when he fussed at night, changing diapers and singing the off-key lullabies that somehow always made the baby settle. The years that followed were filled with the ordinary magic of watching their son grow. Benjamin took his first steps in the main room of the ranch house, fell down, and got back up with determined stubbornness that made everyone laugh and say he was definitely a Bradford. He said his first word, which was hoarse to no one's surprise given how much time he spent around the ranch animals. When Benjamin was 3, Louisa became pregnant again. Their daughter arrived in the summer of 1883, an easy birth compared to her brothers. They named her Rose Sarah Bradford, and she had her mother's blonde hair and her father's dark eyes. Benjamin was fascinated by his baby sister, constantly wanting to help care for her, and Bennett often found him sitting beside her cradle, telling her stories in his childish lisp. As their children grew, Bennett and Louisa's love deepened and matured. They had weathered storms together, both literal and figurative, and emerged stronger for it. They still sat on their porch in the evenings when they could, holding hands and watching their children play in the yard, marveling at the life they had built. Louisa sometimes taught the local children reading and arithmetic in their home, fulfilling her old dream of teaching. Bennett expanded the ranch's operations, eventually buying additional land and building a larger herd. They prospered, not extravagantly but comfortably, and they were content. Victor Morrison's name was rarely spoken, and when it was, it carried no more power to hurt. Louisa had healed, not just from the physical wounds he had inflicted, but from the deeper scars of fear and shame. She was confident now, secure in the knowledge that she was loved and valued, that she had a place in the world that no one could take from her. Years later, when Bennett was 43 and Louisa 40, they added a third child to their family, another son they named William Thomas Bradford. By then, Benjamin was a young man of 18 helping run the ranch alongside his father and uncles. Rose was 15, beautiful and headstrong, with her mother's determination and her father's protective streak when it came to her younger brother. The ranch had grown into one of the most successful operations in the county, respected for its fair dealings and quality livestock. The Bradford name carried weight now, built on integrity and hard work. James had passed away peacefully in his sleep the year before, and Sarah, though grieving her husband, found joy in her grandchildren and her continuing role managing the household. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Bennett took Louisa back to the spot where he had first found her on that dusty road. It looked different now, greener thanks to better rains in recent years, but the basic landscape was the same. "You ever think about that day?" Louisa asked, standing close beside him. "All the time," Bennett admitted. "I think about how easily I might have ridden a different route, how I almost did not go check those far fence lines. I think about what would have happened to you if I had not been there." "Someone else would have found me eventually," Louisa said, but Bennett shook his head. "Maybe. But I am glad it was me. Finding you, bringing you home, watching you heal and grow strong, falling in love with you, it has been the greatest privilege of my life. You and our children, the family we have built together, it means everything." Louisa turned to face him, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "You saved my life that day, Bennett Bradford. Not just by finding me on that road, but by seeing me, by believing me, by standing beside me when it would have been easier to let me go. You gave me back my life, and then made it better than I ever imagined it could be." He kissed her there on that dusty road, the same road where their story had begun 20 years before, and felt the same overwhelming love he had felt on their wedding day, maybe even stronger now, tempered and deepened by 2 decades of life lived together. As they rode back to the ranch, the sun beginning its descent toward evening, Bennett thought about all the ways life could surprise you, how a single decision to ride out and check the fence lines could change everything. He thought about courage and resilience, about how Louisa had survived the worst humanity had to offer and still had room in her heart for love and hope and joy. By the time Benjamin was 25, he was running most of the ranch operations, allowing Bennett to slow down a bit and spend more time with Louisa. Rose had married a school teacher from Desdemona, a good man who treated her well, and they had given Bennett and Louisa 2 grandchildren. William was 17, already as tall as his father and showing promise as a horseman. Sarah passed away quietly in her sleep at 78, surrounded by her family. They buried her beside James on a hill overlooking the ranch, and Louisa planted wildflowers on both graves that bloomed every spring. Life continued its steady rhythm of seasons and celebrations, challenges and triumphs. Bennett and Louisa grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces gaining lines that told the story of lives well lived. They sat on their porch on summer evenings, now watching their grandchildren play in the yard where their own children had played. Sometimes, visitors to the ranch would ask how they met, and Bennett would always tell the truth. He had found her bruised and limping on a dusty road, broken but not defeated. He had asked who hurt her, and eventually she had told him all. That honesty, that trust, had been the foundation of everything that came after. "You have any regrets?" Louisa asked him one evening when they were both in their 60s, sitting in their usual spot on the porch. Bennett thought about it seriously, reviewing their long life together in his mind. The struggles and the joys, the fears and the triumphs, the ordinary days and the extraordinary moments. "Not a single one," he said finally, reaching for her hand and lacing their fingers together the way they had thousands of times before. "Except maybe that I did not tell you I loved you sooner." Louisa laughed, the sound still bright and joyful even after all these years. "You told me soon enough. And you have been showing me every day since. That is what matters." As the sun set over the Texas prairie, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, Bennett Bradford held his wife's hand and counted his blessings. A good life, a loving family, a legacy of decency and hard work, and most importantly, the woman beside him who had survived the worst the world could throw at her and emerged victorious, strong and capable of the deepest love. Their story had started with violence and fear, with a woman alone and hurt on a dusty road and a cowboy who had asked a simple question. But it had transformed into something beautiful, a testament to the power of kindness, the importance of standing up for what is right, and the redemptive strength of love. When Bennett Bradford was 78 years old, he passed away peacefully in his sleep with Louisa beside him, holding his hand as she had held it through all the important moments of their life together. She followed him just 3 years later, her heart finally giving out but her spirit as strong as ever until the very end. They were buried together on the hill beside James and Sarah, overlooking the ranch they had helped build and sustain. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered to say goodbye, telling stories about the remarkable couple who had shown them all what true love looked like, what courage meant, what it was to build something lasting and good in an often harsh world. The small house Bennett had built for Louisa still stood on the edge of the property, preserved by their family as a reminder of where it all began. The porch where they had spent so many evenings remained, weathered by time but solid, a testament to the man who had built it and the woman who had made it a home. And on quiet summer evenings, when the wind whispered through the grass and the stars blazed overhead in the endless Texas sky, you could almost imagine two figures sitting on that porch, holding hands and watching the sunset, their love story complete but never forgotten. A reminder that even in the hardest circumstances, hope and healing and happiness were possible. Bennett had found her bruised and limping, asked who did this, and she had finally told him all. That moment of truth had been the beginning of everything, a foundation of honesty and trust that had sustained them through 55 years of marriage, 3 children, 8 grandchildren, and more joy and sorrow than any one story could contain. But it was their story, uniquely theirs, and it had been beautiful from that dusty road to that final sunset. A love story for the ages set against the backdrop of the Wild West, where a cowboy's question and a woman's courageous answer had changed both their lives forever.